and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap. We've got lots and lots of great information for you today. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded. So if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for any of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use your question and answer tab on your interface and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. We also have a very interactive chat feature, so please feel free to chat us up with your questions, comments, suggestions, anything you want to share with us. Just use that chat interface and we'll be more than happy to chat you back. And also at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is how Vonage uses SCA to automate open source security and compliance. Our speakers today are Valentin Wiedel, who is the Strategic Partner Alliance Manager for EMEA ISVs at AWS, Chris Wallace, who is the Principal Security Architect at Vonage, and Brian Rogers, who's a Channel Sales Engineer at WhiteSource. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate your being here. Valentin, I know that you are going to start the conversation today, so I'm going to hand it off to you, take myself off camera, put myself on mute, and I'll see you guys when we get to the question and answer period.
Thanks, Charlene, and welcome everyone to this webinar. We are very much delighted to have you here. And so, as was introduced, I'm Valentin Wiedel. I'm a Partner Development Manager here at AWS, and today I'll be talking to you about a journey to modern applications. So let's kick things off. And companies are, of course, increasingly global, and their products are completely digital. Cloud technologies, mobile, big data, and also social technologies have all impacted application development, and new digital disruptions are forcing change even faster. And so this new normal really means that application leaders must merge the new digital DNA into their culture, processes, and also technologies to transform their organization into top-performing entities. And of course, with that comes rapid innovation. And DevOps and microservices drive efficiencies. They also align to more resilient code practices and thereby enable developers to create applications faster. This in turn means that businesses can create value through the applications faster and become more responsive to market demands. And according to a recent Gartner report, by 2023, more than 70% of global organizations will be running containerized applications in production, which is actually up from less than 20% in 2019. And so, to maintain really a competitive advantage, digital businesses must also innovate as rapidly as possible, as I've stated before. And because it's all about speed and agility for digital businesses, the faster customers can collect and analyze feedback, the quicker, of course, they can react to their customers. The more customers can reduce costs, the more they can experiment on new ideas. And also the faster customers get new ideas to market, the more successful they are overall. The implications for IT, on the other hand, are that customers need modular-based architectures. So that means breaking down applications into smaller units that are able to be built and released independently and also faster. And of course, customers also need to continuously improve their systems informed by businesses or customer feedback. And here's a fun fact for you guys. 90% of what Amazon is building is driven by customers who tell us what they want. And the last 10% is focused on strategic interpretations of those customers' needs. But customers also need to ensure that their systems provide real-time data-driven insights. And lastly, they need to look at automation to be able to scale up and down as needed. So now let's have a look at what it means to build modern applications. And so to have modern applications, or to build really modern applications, we also need to have modern developer tools. And AWS developer tools allow you to build like Amazon. they really facilitate practices such as continuous delivery and infrastructure as code for your serverless, container, and Amazon EC2. And AWS therefore offers a native toolchain set as well as an open source toolchain set that really both work seamlessly with the AWS stack and services that we offer, but of course also more specifically with our container services. And so if we move to the next slide, we will see the 5 pillars of modern applications. So let's talk through what the 5 pillars of a modern application actually are. And so modern applications are predominantly built on the correct application architecture, which means that we are moving away from monolithic applications towards modular microservices. That means, of course, that they are built on modular and independent components, which in turn can really increase the release velocity, because ultimately changes and updates to those components are, of course, easier to be made. And of course, microservices make applications easier to scale and faster to develop, thereby enabling businesses to innovate quickly and accelerate their time to market. The second pillar that we need to look at is software delivery. There we are talking about things like automation, abstraction, but also standardization. And of course, our developers, whether front-end or back-end, they need tools and frameworks of processes that really enable to rapidly and securely deliver new features to our customers, often releasing on a daily basis or even more frequently. And of course, we also need to have automated release pipelines, including CI/CD, that really enable teams to rapidly test and release lots of code whilst minimizing the errors. And lastly, we also need to look at the standardization for infrastructure as code templates, because that's being provisioned the entire technology stack for an application through code. So whilst ensuring that teams meet those central compliance requirements, which we will look at later again. The third pillar is data strategy. Here, we are really talking about decoupled and purpose-built. And what I mean specifically is that we should take advantage of decoupled data stores, specifically in a one-to-one mapping of a database to a microservice. By decoupling the data along with the microservices, teams are, of course, free to choose the database that best fits to their need and specifically that service. It's really like choosing a database that's purpose-built for that task at hand. The fourth pillar that we should be looking at is how are you operating that? And in AWS's opinion, we should be trying to achieve as serverless as possible, because modern applications really have a lot of those moving parts with the microservices, as I've explained, and of course, including those databases on top of those microservices. It makes it easy and more difficult to scale. And that's why serverless technologies really reduce that burden, because they can run without the need of the infrastructure provisioning and of course the scaling, and they have built-in high availability as well as security. And so the fifth pillar of modern applications is really that management and that governance, which means providing those programmatic guardrails. And so when we are managing the organization securely and legally, the priority number one for our customers is, of course, to have strong security and strong governance, and which are really being expressed as guardrails. So what does that mean? Because increasingly, organizations address this by adopting the concept of guardrails, where we are using mechanisms such as, for example, processes or practices that really reduce both the occurrence and the blast radius of undesirable application behavior. And therefore, guardrails are usually expressed as code. So let's have a look at the challenge of security when we are talking about this. And specifically, one of the things that we need to look at is, as our customers are dealing with migrations and also modernizations of their application stack, the number one concern is that of security. And at AWS, we have that shared responsibility model between AWS and our customers. And AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. What does that actually mean? That means that AWS is responsible for protecting the infrastructure that runs all of the services offered in AWS cloud. This infrastructure is, of course, composed of our hardware, the software, the networking, and also the facilities that run AWS cloud services. On the other hand, AWS customers are responsible for the security in the cloud. And this means that they are responsible for network traffic protection, OS, network and firewall configurations, platforms, identity and access management, as well as, of course, the applications that they built. And when it comes to building secure applications, our customers know that the impact of issues further down the development process results in costly repairs. So that's really meaning that we need to shift left, because ultimately you should never pass a defect downstream, as this really will increase your costs of repair. So let's have a look at the next slide, where we're really talking about what are the solutions patterns that we see. And as customers from us are migrating and modernizing to really reinvent their businesses to compete in that new normal, what I described earlier today, it's very critical to do so in a very secure manner. And with the cloud, of course, there are also more entry points, and you also need to have a very holistic view. And that's why AWS offers a lot of services, but it's still that shared responsibility model where you really need to build something in partnership with AWS, and you also need to ensure that that security is built in right from the start. And so one of those key elements for modern applications is, of course, the software delivery that uses automation, abstraction, and also the standardization. And that's why frameworks and tooling, for example, take away that complexity of provisioning and also configuring those resources. And we also need to look at automated release pipelines. And so that means including things like CI/CD, for example, to enable your teams to rapidly test and release lots of codes whilst minimizing those errors. And standardization through infrastructure as code templates provision the entire technology stack for an application through code, really ensuring that your teams meet those company requirements. And it's very important to apply those security tools and practices across the whole application delivery cycle. And so what do we mean by that? Well, we mean that we need to have security in the pipeline, which includes things like code analysis, software composition analysis, something we will be talking today about, of course, vulnerability scanning, hash verification, infrastructure as code scanning, and other things like SAST and a few more. And then, of course, you also need to have security off the pipeline. So that means, how are you building those environments? Do we have the right levels of access? And of course, will you pass any external or internal audits? So now let's have a look at some of the specific threats that we have seen out there in the field. And of course, as our customers are building modern applications, those customers will package and run their applications as containers. And a lot of those common breaches that have happened, of course, is because the companies work with technologies that probably you will have also worked with. And so, for example, we can look at Docker Hub. That used to contain images that customers once considered validated images on Docker Hub, but of course, they still contain crypto mining software, for example, inside of those images. There are also other examples, for example, when the Kubernetes dashboard at one point had a bug in it that really allowed perpetrators to get your access keys from AWS through the cloud endpoints. And patching images and vulnerabilities as early as possible and as often as possible is critical, because understanding how to minimize and limit the blast radius is really making sure that those incidents don't become exploits. And that's really the goal here. So now let's look at how we are talking about security in and off the pipeline. And when we are talking about the security off the pipeline, it's really difficult to talk about all those services in this webinar, which is why I'm just going to focus on two quick ones to give you a quick high-level overview of what the security off the pipeline looks like. And at AWS, we offer a service called AWS Security Hub. This really gives our customers a comprehensive view of their security alters and also security postures across their whole AWS accounts. With Security Hub, our customers can now have a single plane that really aggregates, organizes, and also prioritizes their security alerts or findings for multiple AWS services, such as, for example, Amazon Guard Duty, Amazon Inspector, and a few more. The second that I wanted to highlight was AWS Systems Manager. This is really a service that gives you that visibility and control of your infrastructure on AWS. So System Managers really provides you with a unified user interface so that you can view that operational data from multiple AWS sources and allow you to automate operational tasks across your AWS resources. So now let's have a look at what it means to talk about security in the pipeline. And I'm sure that this is something that we'll also be talking about later again, is security in the pipeline really means that you need to take care of your AWS environments. And so with AWS Identity and Access Management, or IAM, of course, you enable and you also manage access to your AWS services in a secure manner. So using IAM, customers, of course, can create and manage their AWS users and also their groups, and they can also use the user permissions to allow and deny their access to AWS services. So a good use case really here is to use IAM to apply the least privileges. The second service I want to talk about is Amazon Maisie. And this is really a fully managed data security and data privacy service that uses machine learning and pattern matching to discover and protect your sensitive data in AWS. And so Amazon Maisie really helps with that, automates the discovery of sensitive data at scale, and also lowers the cost of protecting your data, of course. So now let's switch over to Vonage and see how they're using software composition analysis within their software development lifecycle. Over to you, Chris. And I think you will have to take yourself off mute.
Sorry about that. Go ahead and you can put my slide deck up now. Thank you. All right, so I'm Chris Wallace, the Senior Security Architect here at Vonage. Oversees such things as mock incidents, incident response, threat intel, phishing, bug bounty, and in this case, software composition analysis. Going to talk briefly just about Vonage's experience with WhiteSource. We are an AWS customer. We're pretty far along in our migration to a serverless environment. We have numerous containers and Lambda functions, and our infrastructure as code is pretty well developed. So relative to software composition analysis, wanted to start with what our initial motivation of looking into a platform like this was. And about a year and a half ago, a little over a year and a half ago, our legal department reached out, and they were faced with the task of being compliant with the 80 or so different open source licenses we had in our environment. And you know, we are a DevOps environment here at Vonage. We have a microservices architecture. So finding out what open source packages weren't in our environment in a manual way would be quite the task. It would take a lot of time. So the challenges here were easily met by the solution. The first thing we got from WhiteSource was an inventory of our OS licenses that we had in our environment. You know, some of the licenses have effects on intellectual property, like GPL, where you're sort of required to publish your own code if you use, you know, certain packages. So we needed, in order to protect our own intellectual property, identify all the licenses we had in our environment and what their impact might be on our own distribution of software. And then we also wanted to have something in place that once we went through this process of identifying the packages and the licenses, we wanted to have the ability to stop users from introducing new packages with these same issues into the environment as well. So WhiteSource, as I'll get into in a little bit, definitely address those issues. So after going through our legal factors, we quickly recognized that there was significant security challenges we faced as well. You know, the first time we hooked WhiteSource up into our GitHub repositories, you know, and you see the list. You basically get your first vulnerability scan report out of it, and you see critical vulnerabilities in your environment. And you know, the first thought is, okay, how do we go about even approaching this, and how do we go about remediating these? So, and again, here we wanted to establish some kind of criteria where once we went through this audit process, this sort of one-time audit process, we wanted to be able to stop people from reintroducing these libraries with vulnerabilities back into our environment. One thing we noticed was that not only did we have these individual OS packages, but we had multiple versions of individual OS packages in our environment. So in some cases, we were running a version that was completely secure, or as secure as we know anything to be, and others we were running older versions. Now, just because it's an older version doesn't necessarily mean it has direct impact on your ability to be secure. One of the biggest things we found from WhiteSource was not only did it look at the packages that we were using and identify, okay, this package has critical vulnerabilities in it, it looked at how our code used those packages and identified whether or not we were exercising the vulnerable portions of the library. This helped a great deal in our initial task of addressing our vulnerabilities, because whenever you have a project, the first thing you start to do is identify priorities and establish the criteria by which you prioritize what you address. And to not only know that, okay, we have to update this version of an OS package, but we have to update it because we're actually using the code that's vulnerable. One of the other interesting things that WhiteSource made available to us is sometimes upgrading OS packages across major version releases is a bit of a project in and of itself. So one of the pieces of information that WhiteSource made available to us is what version you would have to upgrade to address that specific vulnerability. So in some cases, we were able to identify higher versions that wasn't necessarily a full version upgrade. We upgraded to that higher version to address the vulnerability, and then on our backlog put the process of doing the full version upgrade, which is can be a slightly larger process. Now, everything I just talked about is being done by DevOps teams, and if anybody has ever worked, as many of you I assume do, given our forum here, one of the key ingredients of DevOps is speed. From a security standpoint, I know that I can't reach out to the DevOps teams and ask them to do something that is going to slow down their speed to deploy code in the environment. We deploy, some of our microservices are deploying code multiple times a day, certainly at least once a day. I think some teams, if they saw another team pushing code once a day, they'd call them slackers to some extent. So you really need to keep the speed in the process. And then, as Valentin mentioned, this whole shift left notion. I've heard shift left said, I don't know, thousands of times, at least. The difficulty is not saying it, the difficulty is doing it, which can be challenging. Now, relative to these two things, WhiteSource, again, offered a variety of services that sort of made it easy for us to accomplish these tasks. First of all, the direct scanning of GitHub repositories, that made it super easy to sort of establish our baseline. Where are we right now? To know how to get to where you're going, you have to know where you start. So by sort of going to the ground truth of our repository, of our code repositories, we're able to identify that and quickly identify which groups we had to focus on, which groups were in bigger trouble than other groups. In other words, which groups hadn't done a good job at keeping their open source packages up to date. Relative to integration into the CI/CD pipeline, this is where we started to see our ability to not only address our vulnerabilities and our issues that we had in our environment, but then also stop new vulnerabilities from being introduced. So as part of our CI/CD pipeline, we integrated WhiteSource as a security gate, so that if you were going to introduce a critical or high vulnerability into our environment, your build was basically stopped, and you weren't allowed to introduce those new vulnerabilities. To that end, and talking about the shift left notion, it definitely saves time to shift left. You just don't want to shift left in a way that creates a roadblock for the development. The fact that WhiteSource had several IDE integrations where developers, while they're actually writing their code, if they were considering pulling in a new package or pulling in a package from one of their other microservices, they could immediately see what the issues were with the package. So it can immediately stop them from using an older package or a package that has vulnerabilities in it. And then also one of the things we had a concern of was basically dead packages that were no longer supported by a community. And we wanted to stop having those integrated into our environment as well. So when you put these three things together, one, it completely addressed our legal requirements in terms of identifying the open source licenses we had in our environment, the ability to put these security gates in place where we knew we weren't going to be introducing new issues into our code base, which allowed us to focus on addressing the ones that already existed, and WhiteSource's ability to give us seamless integrations with our repository, our CI/CD, and our CI/CD pipelines, and also providing the information right down to the developer through the IDE, really allowed us to do that shift left in a way that it's rare. I've been involved with several shift left initiatives, and sometimes they can be painful. This one wasn't painful at all. This was actually pretty seamless. And right now, just about I think within the next couple of months, every single developer and microservice will be funneled through or be using WhiteSource at Vonage. And that, from my perspective, from a pure security perspective, it helps me sleep a little better. I still don't quite sleep from all the other issues we have, but relative to this issue in terms of compositional analysis and the type of open source packages you actively have in your environment, we feel like WhiteSource has helped us address this in a major way. So thank you. And I think now I'll hand it over to Brian, who will, from WhiteSource.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Let me share up my screen. Give me 1 second.
You had it, but they disappeared.
Apologies.
No worries.
Can you see?
They're coming up now. Yep, we can see it now. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. So thanks, Chris. And thank you everybody for joining. My name is Brian Rogers. I am the channel sales engineer, actually the sole channels and alliances sales engineer at WhiteSource currently. And today I'll be talking a bit about WhiteSource as a whole, what we do, and of course how we work with organizations like Vonage to really help drive efficiency with vulnerability management and just management in general of their open source code base. So WhiteSource takes a multifaceted approach. So to the management in general piece, we not only look at security vulnerabilities, but as Chris mentioned, we also we look at inventory as a whole. So in your scan, you'll be able to, after post-scan, you'll be able to see your entire open source landscape effectively in a report. But we also cover the licensing and compliance piece of it as well. So in terms of just getting the full spectrum of coverage, that's definitely something that we focus on. So shift left has been said a few times in this presentation. So I'll spare you saying it again, or too many times again, but this is something that we take pride in, very much so. The ability to shift left as far as possible. And we do this through a variety of automation and integration points. As you can see on the right side of the screen, I included just some of the major integration pieces that we offer. So all your major repositories, all your major CI/CD tools, as well as things like Artifactory and ticketing systems like Jira and MS Work items, really to drive that workflow piece. But to get into it, the repository integration is widely used, especially on the GitHub side, and it is incredibly useful in terms of shortening SLAs in your SDLC. It's a mouthful. So not only do we have the ability to create automated pull requests to push fixes and or updates, but we also will not only give you only negative feedback, we'll also give you positive feedback when something is fixed by PR. So that could be great for a managerial purpose, to keep tabs on your development teams and how well they've been remediating issues. And then the CI/CD integrations are extremely useful as well. As Chris mentioned, we have the ability to set our scanner to potentially fail builds based on our, we have a very in-depth policy engine attached to our UI, which feeds into all of our integration points as well. So not only can you integrate and shift left, but you can lay a system of governance directed toward or catered to your organization. So essentially, you'll be alerted to what you would like to be alerted to based on your code base. And frequency. So we can not only plug in to, say, a Jenkins pipeline as a build step with, say, every nightly build, but you can also plug it in as many times as you want to get as much security posture as you need or as suits you. And at the very left, we have our IDE and browser integrations. So we have native integrations for Eclipse, IntelliJ, Visual Studio, and VS Code right now, and we're working on a couple others. But this allows the developer to actually real-time see, while writing code, what or where the vulnerabilities lie in the open source packages he's pulling in, so that you can fix them before they even get to your CI pipes, and especially towards your repositories. So aside from the IDE integrations, we offer what we call browser integrations, which is basically a lightweight Chrome or Microsoft Edge right now extension that actually runs a lightweight scan over any HTML page. So say you're on a Stack Overflow or Maven Central and you're a developer looking at a package to pull in, you can run WhiteSource Advise for Chrome, and it will, again, feed your policies, and it will tell you in a pop-up window if there's any vulnerabilities, and then it'll direct you to where they are or if it's violating any policies in real time. So again, in terms of getting as far left as possible, that's been extremely useful and well received. So really what we're driving at, just as a whole at WhiteSource, is of course DevSecOps and the congruency here. So with the open source landscape, rapidly growing, comes of course some challenges, and a lot of that is friction between security teams versus development teams versus DevOps or legal teams, and just having a central or centric workflow about it, so that you don't slow down software delivery and you don't release anything into production that's insecure. And so that's why we take the multifaceted approach with not only security, but also inventory management and compliance. So moving on, WhiteSource is very focused on the remediation portion. Because, and as Chris mentioned, it's one thing to just see all the vulnerabilities, but it's another thing to actually drive that remediation flow and get them fixed. So notoriously in the industry, that has been the case, where most of the effort has been on detection, and then prioritization and remediation comes secondary. So what WhiteSource, our model, is actually the reverse of this. So we have effectively turned that pyramid upside down, if you will, where remediation is the top focus, as well as prioritization, and detection is at the bottom, because as I said before, once you run your scan, everything that you're pointing the scanner at will be detected. So the shift in focus is definitely needed within the industry. And as Chris mentioned again, we have a tool for prioritization of remediation, which I'll get to in a few slides. But really here, the goal is to shift left responsibly. So you're making an impact in your organization, not simply checking a box. So with that, we have a very pragmatic approach. So how we see it is most communities or organizations are faced with 4 basic options, right? So you can stop using open source code, which as I said before, as the landscape is shifting, is probably not a great idea, just because of the ease of use of an open source code base versus a proprietary one. You can ignore the threat of vulnerabilities, which is definitely not a good idea unless you would like your your data breached and or released and have your company all over the news, which nobody likes. You can react only when there's issues, when issues arise, which is a neutral approach, or you can take the proactive approach, which is what we like to convey to our customers, not only in keeping things up to date, but also in remediation and keeping your licenses equal or equivalent to your organizational policies. So you're not introducing any risky license types either. So on the keeping things up to date piece, through our studies, we found that 84% of all open source CVEs already have a fix posted, either in the NVD, or we also curate vulnerabilities from a number of private security advisories around the world. So we also will alert you to vulnerabilities that are valid, but maybe have not been yet published or are queued to be published by the NVD. So you'll get a full view, in terms of being proactive on exactly, what you need to do and where. So why don't people just do this normally? Because it takes time. And sometimes it doesn't work, right? Sometimes the vulnerabilities still exist. There's a number of variables. Sometimes they appear. However, we have a tool, and one widely used as well by Vonage, that sits right within your repository called WhiteSourceRenovate. And it supports over 50 package managers. It supports our full range of language support. And really, it helps automate that process of versioning. So keeping things, again, up to date, the newest version, essentially to have the least amount of vulnerabilities. So this tool will actually automate merge requests and update the libraries for you to the newest version. And with that, it'll also give you what we call merge confidence. So merge confidence at WhiteSource with WhiteSourceRenovate. I'll preface by saying that through GitHub, the community around WhiteSourceRenovate is over 200,000 developers and security professionals. So merge confidence essentially tells you, as you can see here, if you're upgrading to 1.25 to 1.26, how old is the newest release that you're upgrading to? Within the community using Renovate, what's the adoption rate? What's the pass rate? Did it effectively fix the issue? And then overall, the confidence in. So really, not only does it give you the automation piece, but it gives you that peace of mind to really to drive adoption of secure code, but also not pushing anything that is insecure. So now that we have everything up to date, and we have a workflow in place, and we have, say, a list of CVEs or vulnerabilities, prioritization comes into play. So through our research, again, we found that 70% of all the vulnerabilities detected in a given scan are actually not reachable by the method that you're calling. So we have a tool, we call it WhiteSource Prioritize. It's very well received, very impactful tool that actually it takes the open source scanning a step further. Not only does it tell you alert you to the license, the library, and the vulnerability, but it actually will look at the call trace. It'll look at the endpoint of where you're calling that piece of code from said library. So you're not only going to see that this library has a vulnerability, you're going to see if you're calling the vulnerable method. So only 30% of these vulnerabilities turn out to be actually reachable. So how this comes into play is it really helps a development team, again, prioritize and decrease their SLA to remediation. So they can see, okay, I'm calling this vulnerable method, and maybe before I had thought of this as basically a less important feat, but now that I have ran WhiteSource Prioritize, I can see that I'm actually calling that CVE directly, and maybe this needs to be prioritized before some of the other vulnerabilities. And that's really the end goal, is to fix what's exploitable first. And that is what this tool gives you the ability to do. It's been launched. It was launched about 2 years ago, and again, it has a great reputation. So just to take it a little bit further and give you a little bit of a viewpoint on what it would look like, this is being in the UI or also in one of the integration points that I mentioned before. So as you can see here, this Ant library has a high severity vulnerability, but it has a green shield. So we have a legend, if you will, of shields. So green means that you're not calling a vulnerable method. Red means that you are. So even though this is a high severity, it is not being called. However, this medium severity CVE is exploitable. And then we will give you the actual stack trace, the path, and the target, so that you can effectively remediate that vulnerability. And again, this is an invaluable tool to a development team because it drastically not only reduces the time to remediation, but in that gives you time to remediate more of the CVEs, especially the ones that are exploitable, so that you're not spending time or too much time updating things that maybe could have waited, and leaving yourself open to risk of attack. So that's really a wrap on my piece. Again, I appreciate everybody's time and happy to take any questions as well. Not sure, Charlene, if you want me to stop sharing.
No, you're good. You can go, just leave that on up. That's fine. We'll go ahead and dive on into question and answer period right now. If you have a question for any of our speakers, please go ahead and use that question and answer tab on the interface, and we will go ahead and get to them as they come in. Right now, let's see. We did get a question about whether the slides are going to be shared. I do know that Valentine's slides will not be shared. I'm not sure if Chris or Brian want to share theirs, but you guys can let us know for sure.
I can share mine.
Okay. All right. And Chris, you're on mute if you want to.
Sorry. Yeah, you can share mine. I just put it in the chat, actually.
Perfect. Okay. Guys, if you have a question, please go ahead and use that question and answer tab, because currently our question and answer kitty is empty. So go ahead and do that. But, actually, one of the things I was interested in, Chris, for you is when you guys were taking a look at different technologies out there, what was it that made you guys land on WhiteSource specifically?
The biggest two items for us was, one, the number of languages that were supported. They were by far and away out in front of everybody else relative to that. And then also the variety of integrations, both within the CI/CD pipeline, but then also within the IDEs. That was another area that a lot of the competition just at the time could not replicate. And when we saw what the actual plugins looked like and how they could be used, we immediately saw the value in it and realized we went through a POC with several other vendors, but it was pretty clear fairly quickly that WhiteSource was sort of the leader in the space.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay. We've gotten a question in from Prabhakar, and I apologize. I'm sure I mispronounced your name, and I apologize for that. He asks, do you provide a bill of materials? Brian, I believe this is
I assume that's for me. So right now we're working on supporting SPDX and the typical bill of material formats. Right now we have support for SPDX via GitHub, GitHub Actions, and we're working on rolling that out GA. In terms of just typical reporting, though, we do have essentially an inventory report, which will give you almost what you need, and then using that GitHub function to augment.
All right, great. Guys, if you have a question for either Valentin or Chris or Brian, please go ahead and use that question and answer tab, or you can put it in the chat interface also, and we'll be happy to move it over. While we're waiting to see if we get any more questions in, I do want to remind the audience that today's event is being recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you're just going to want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following the webinar today, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. So the webinar will be available to you via that link. It'll also be living on the Security Boulevard website, so you can go look for it there. You'll just go to securityboulevard.com, look in the events section, upcoming or webinars on demand, and it should be right there waiting for you. All right, guys, doesn't look like we're getting any more questions in right now, but I'm going to go ahead and leave the question and answer tab open to see if we get any stragglers coming in. And while we're waiting, why don't we go ahead and do that that drawing for the 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, and then we'll close it out if we don't have any more questions. Our 4 Amazon gift card, $25 Amazon gift card winners are, excuse me, Brian R. Congratulations, Brian. Our second winner today is John L. Congratulations, John. Third winner is Yarav S. Congratulations, Yarav. And our fourth and final winner today is Alexander H. Congratulations, Alexander. We'll be following up with all 4 of you via email to get your Amazon gift cards over to you. So please check your inbox, and if you don't see it there, please check your spam folder. Guys, it looks like you guys had a very comprehensive presentation, because there's not a lot. There are no more questions coming in from the audience. So I do want to thank our audience members, those of you who did submit questions. Thank you very much for doing that. And great stuff all the way around. Valentin and Chris and Brian, thank you, all 3 of you, for great presentations. Lots and lots of really, really, like I said before, really comprehensive information and true value add there. I really appreciate your time and your energy and your experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Have a good one.